Good morning to some and good afternoon to others. My colleague and I, Julia Nidecker Gonzalez, will be presenting information on national objectives. And I'm going to start off with talking about the low and moderate income area benefit national objective. But first, we have a few housekeeping things to go over. As a reminder, these PowerPoint presentations you've been viewing all week and webinar recordings will be available on the HUD Exchange. I don't have a date for that, but it will be made available on the HUD Exchange soon. Participants are in listen-only mode, and if desired, closed captions can be viewed using the Show Captions feature, which is below the video player. And if you need additional information, you can consult the attendee guide for more information. It's on the resources page. Next slide, please. Okay, any content-related questions that you have should be submitted using the Q&A feature, which is also located below the video player. You may have to scroll down to see it. You are encouraged to submit questions throughout the presentation. You don't have to wait until the end to submit your questions. We will try to answer them during the presentation, but most may be answered at the very end. Next slide, please. With regard to technical issues, if you have any, you may request assistance through the chat box, which is on the right side of your screen. And if you have any other technical questions, you can email them to the email address shown on the screen. Next slide, please. We do have polls every so often, excuse me. And you can answer poll questions using the polls tab, which is also below the video player. And you may also, with this, also have to scroll down to view any poll questions that may be presented. Okay. If you want to access questions or polls while you simultaneously are looking at the event, and you don't want to scroll down, you can download the Slido app on your phone or go to the website here, slide.do, in your web browser, then type in the code for the session. The code will be displayed on the screen at the time that the question is being posed, or the poll question is being posed. The support team will be available to assist. Okay. Now let's get into national objectives. Every CDBG and CDBG-CV activity must meet one of the following 3 national objectives. And the first 2 actually have components. The first and the primary one is to benefit low and moderate income persons. The second is to prevent or eliminate slums and blight and/or meet an urgent need. I think it was mentioned before, but it bears repeating that the statutory overall benefit requirement requires that up to 70% of annual appropriation CDBG funds over a 1, 2, or 3-year period is certified by the grantee for use for activities that benefit LMI persons. With regard to CV, up to 70% of the total amount awarded from each funding round, not less than 70% of that total. Overall, it must be used for activities that benefit LMI persons. But it's separate from determining that, meeting that requirement from the annual appropriation CDBG program. Next slide, please. Okay, here's a quick chart that shows you the categories. I had mentioned that The first two have what we call subcategories. And what we're going to do is briefly go through each one. Note that it doesn't say it here, but we want to emphasize that the CARES Act did not waive the requirement to meet a national objective, nor the overall benefit requirement. Therefore, activities have to meet a national objective. Next slide, please. The first one we're going to discuss under the low and moderate income categories is, oh, I'm so sorry for that. But we're going to talk about area benefit. And area benefit is one that's usually met by the use of facilities and so forth. But let's go over the basic requirements to meet the area benefit national objective. Next slide, please. Okay, these are the basic requirements. The benefits of the activity must be available to all area residents, meaning it can't be limited in any way, for example, to children, for example, or teens. It has to be available to everyone. And at least 51% of the persons that reside in the service area for the activity as determined by the grantee, 51% of the residents of that area must be low and moderate income. Also, the service area for the activity must be primarily residential. Let me start off by saying that we do not define primarily residential in the CDBG program. You will not find a definition in the regulations or in the statute. But we will say this, that 51% doesn't mean that an area is primarily residential. Next slide, please. Okay, when we do 51% LMI, that's exactly what it is. No rounding. If it's 50.9%, it doesn't meet the area benefit national objective. We are not allowed to round up. However, there is an exception with regard to upper quartile. An upper quartile is an area where, let me see if I explain this a little better. Okay, we have grantees that have very few LMI areas, and they're called exception grantees. And to determine what percentage they have to meet the area benefit national objective, you have to take the upper four quartiles and divide the result. And that determines what the higher level is. So you may have an area that's only, let's say, 30% LMI, but you have areas within that maybe are, 35%, 40, 45, and then 20, and once you figure out the upper quartile percentage, that's the percentage they'd have to meet. Depending on the area, some exception grantees have to meet 40, 49%, 48, 50, but we have some that are even in the low 30s up until 40. But in every case, it will be lower than 51%, only because when computing the upper quartile, it was determined that whatever the highest number is, that's the number or percentage of LMI persons that must be in that service area. Next slide, please. Okay, Well, how do you determine if an area is low and moderate income? There are a couple of ways to do that. There's local survey data that you can use. Also, we have data on our webpage, on the HUD page you may use. That's uploaded by our Systems Development and Evaluation division. Also, there's other data loaded by Policy Development and Research that has information concerning LMI percentages and income limits and things of that sort that you can use to determine if an area is LMI. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, with regard to the data that's on our webpage that I mentioned, that's uploaded by the System Development and Evaluation Division. The data is based on these factors here. Right now, we're using the 2010 census data, but here is just some of the ways. And right now, we're using the 2011-2015 ACS 5-year data. Now, we'll admit that data is not one of my areas of expertise, but I can speak to meeting a national objective. But as far as computing it, that's a little beyond my scope. Next slide, please. This is our page that I mentioned. That SD&D or as Systems Development Evaluation load our information. And if you notice on the right-hand side, there are various data sets that you can access. There's also mapping data that you can use as well. But there's data that's here that's available that you may use, and also the GIS maps. I'm not quite sure how to use those, but we do have that as another resource. And then there's other software that you can use that that you can use to determine the LMI percentage of an area. I will say, though, that there are areas where you may believe that it is not, since the data is incorrect, or you may believe that the data does not support the actual income levels of an area. And then in that case, you can conduct what's called a survey to determine the LMI percentage for the area that you're trying to serve. And there's a notice that details on how to do that and what the service methodologies that you can use to determine if the area is actually 51%, if you're not an exception grantee, LMI. We didn't really put anything on here regarding that, so I'm just making this known, but I can, if you would like, post the notice later as a resource, but there's a notice that describes how to do it. And you may send that information to your local HUD field office for approval to determine if the survey methodology that you choose to use is sound. Next slide, please. My colleague, Robert Peterson, who actually now is the director of the State and Small Cities Division, but who is also a data expert, he did a video. If you go back to the previous page, I think there was a photo of him. Okay, well, maybe they took it down. But there's a video there. This is the link to the video. And it explains not only the data aspects of meeting this national objective, but it also gives additional detailed information with regard to the requirements to meet the area benefit national objective. As I stated before, generally public facilities and improvements are the type of activities that generally will meet this national objective. And I urge you, whenever you have some free time, to please watch this video. When I tell you, it is very, very much worth your while. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Julia Nidecker-Gonzalez, and she's going to talk about the low and moderate income limited clientele national objective.
Thank you, Gloria. Good afternoon and good morning to some of you, whether you're on the West Coast or further east. So Gloria just reviewed the first category on the left-hand side, if you look at this chart, of the low and moderate income first national objective. And there are 4 subcategories. And I just say that to say that I'll never forget, I monitored a city once and they said, oh, I looked at their files and I was monitoring them. And they said, oh, we use the low mod national objective, so we're good. And I said, but which of the 4 subcategories did you use? And they looked at me like, I don't know what you're talking about. They didn't even realize there were 4 separate subcategories under this low and moderate national objectives. So for those of you who are new, I just want to clarify, a national objective, the national objective is the purpose of the funding. Are you funding low mod people? Are you doing clearing slum and blight, or are you meeting an urgent need? The eligible activity is what you are funding. So the national objective is the purpose of the funding. The eligible activity is what you are funding. That's for the new people. And one last plug here before I start. I recommend anyone who's brand new to CDBG to Google Explore CDBG. And there is a lovely video on that site called CDBG 101, an overview of national objectives and eligible activities. And I'll post that in our for you all so you can watch that, but very, very useful. It'll reinforce what Gloria and I are going over today for the very new people. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the low and moderate benefit for limited clientele is used to fund activities that serve a specific population. That's why it's called limited. And for example, teens or women or kids in an aftercare program. Examples could be, for example, a recreation center that serves youth. So a CDBG grantee might be using its public service dollars to serve youth, and it would use the national objective limited clientele for this particular youth. Or maybe a job training program for teenagers. If it's just for a specific population, this is when we use limited clientele. And so just keep that in mind. Another group that limited clientele funds is the presumed benefit group. And this consists of funding activities for abused children, victims of domestic violence, severely disabled adults, persons with AIDS, the illiterate, the homeless, elderly, and migrant farm workers who are presumed all to be low income. Income documentation for activities serving only members of these presumed groups is not required because it's presumed they're low income. Another way that the limited clientele national objective can be used is for nature and location activities. So for example, it can fund a job preparation program located in a public housing complex that is designed to serve the public housing tenants who have already been income qualified from Section 8. So just based on the nature and location of the activity, we pretty much know they're low income. And because it's a specific population, it's a limited population, we use the LMC because we're just using CDBG funding, for example, to fund a job training program to that population. Another example of limited clientele funding would be like a counseling program for domestic violence offenders in a prison. Again, that's a very limited population and very focused. Okay, next slide. So the limited clientele national objective can also be used to fund the removal of architectural barriers for severely disabled adults or the elderly to increase their mobility or accessibility in specific scenarios. It also can be used to provide CDBG funding to owners of a microenterprise who are low and moderate income persons for up to 3 years. And the limited clientele national objective can be used for job training and employment support services such as peer support programs, counseling, childcare, and transportation with certain types of job training programs. Okay, so I'm going to turn this back over to Gloria because we're alternating. And Gloria, back to you.
Thank you. I was just answering a couple of questions in the chat. I mean, in the Q&A quickly, but we'll still discuss them a little after. We'll still discuss it a little bit. I'm sorry, let me turn my camera back on. We'll still discuss them a little bit more. But here, we talked about limited clientele and some of the activities. Limited clientele activities are usually, not only are they limited to the presumed groups, there's some other things I want to point out. Under the regulations, an activity can be limited clientele. Also, if it doesn't, let's say it doesn't benefit a presumed group, such as the homeless. There's the second provision under there, which is B, because that's A, is to require information on family size and income to show that the beneficiary, that 51%, I'm sorry, of the beneficiaries are LMI. And then C is to limit the activity exclusively to LMI persons. And that would also require collection. It doesn't say it in the reg, but to demonstrate compliance, you would have to collect information on family size and income to show that 100% are LMI. There's also nature and location, which has been used probably a little more in CV, but we'll get to that. Also, the removal of architectural barriers. There's a provision in 208A2, which is where limited clientele is, that allows an activity to qualify under limited clientele because it removes barriers that restrict either the elderly and/or adults meeting the census definition of severely disabled to access that facility. And so an activity can be carried out and meet the national objective to make that facility accessible for those persons. Also, there's another provision under limited clientele, micro enterprise. A person who wants to either start or use CDBG funds to expand a micro enterprise that it has started, long as all the requirements under 572.010 are met. If the owner is LMI, starting that micro enterprise would meet the limited clientele national objective, and the person or the owner is presumed LMI for 3 years thereafter. There's also an additional provision that talks about certain types of job training efforts. And that is something we'll get into a little bit later. Next slide, please.
Yeah, Gloria, I just want to say for those of you who want clarity on what Gloria went into detail with, I suggest you go to the limited clientele 57208A2 and it lists all of this. You can Google it, limited LMC national objective CDBG. You can Google it and it'll pull it up, and you really honestly, you'll see it all outlined there because I just touched on a few, but thank you, Gloria. Very clear.
Sure. I don't mind adding a little extra. I mean, the whole idea was not to overwhelm you with slides, but still give you the information that you needed. Okay. Housing. One of my favorites. Okay. Any activity that will meet the LMI housing national objective means that the beneficiaries must be low and moderate income households versus low and moderate income families or persons. Next slide, please. Okay. I mentioned that briefly already. For housing activities, this is the only available national objective. The activities identified below are the ones carried out with CDBG and or CDBG-CV that would meet this national objective. Homeowner rehabilitation is eligible under 57202. So is multifamily rehabilitation, and home buyer assistance is eligible under 570-201N. With regard to documenting meeting this national objective, it depends on the occupancy of the housing unit. If you have a single unit structure, it must be occupied by LMI household. If you have a duplex, one of the 2 units has to be occupied by such a household. And then if you have an apartment building or a building with more units than 3, then 51% of those units have to be occupied by low and moderate income households. One note I want to point out to you is that meeting this national objective is determined at initial occupancy. It's not an ongoing requirement going forward unless you as the grantee decide to make it a requirement going forward. But generally, to meet that national objective is initial occupancy. Next question, please. Next slide, please. Okay. There are a couple of circumstances where this national objective can be met with less than 51% occupancy by LMI households. The regulations give more detail, but if CDBG funds are being used to assist with the cost of developing a multi-family or multi-unit building being constructed, usually when we say development costs, we may be talking about, for example, the infrastructure or the water and sewer that, will have to be built in. So, for availability once the actual construction has taken place. And it has to be a non-elderly building, more and more you drive around and you see a lot of what they call senior housing, where you have to be a certain age to be able to move into those structures. It cannot be that type of structure in this instance. The minimum amount of LMI household occupancy for this is 20%. It can be higher, but lower than 51%. But whatever the percentage is, whether it's 20, 30, 40, or 45, or 49, that portion of CDBG costs that will be paid cannot be greater than the percentage of LMI occupancy. So if it's 30% LMI occupancy in this case, then 30% of the cost of the activity can be paid for with CDBG funds. Also, I want you to note that aggregation is allowed in a couple of instances. CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions. There's a provision in the regs at 57208D that talks about aggregation. And if, let's say, if a CDFI is carrying out housing rehabilitation activities in a particular area, they can aggregate the units so that they're considered, the regs call it a single structure. But what it means is that you add up the total number of units that the CDFI is rehabilitating, and 51% of them have to be occupied by low and moderate income households. The same is true for an NRSA. If housing rehab is being carried out at an NRSA, same thing. Let's say you're doing 25 single units. Add them up, and 13 of them have to be occupied by low and moderate income households. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, this is rare, but we point it out because it's a possibility. In rare cases, you may have some housing activities, usually rehab, that may qualify under slum blight area basis or spot basis. We haven't gotten to slum blight yet, but there are 3 categories there, and 2 of them are identified here. If it happens to be done on an area basis, slum blight area, it has to meet the requirements at 57208A. B. My apologies, B. B1. There's a list of requirements there that have to be met for the area where the house is located. It has to be in substandard condition, and whatever deficiencies are causing it to be considered slum and or blighted and substandard, those have to be fixed first. And then if additional rehab is needed, it can be done with CDBG only if it'll meet meet the housing national objective. This is only to cover things that are used to rehab that would remove the deterioration, the substandard, what's making it substandard, and those type of things. But your general plumbing and your towel replacement in the kitchen and things like that would be okay if it is being done and the housing national objective can be met. Slum blight spot is another national objective, but here you can only use this national objective to cover housing rehabilitation that is necessary to eliminate conditions that threaten the public health and safety. I emphasize that it's not the resident of the housing unit's safety. It has to be the public health and safety. You have bricks falling off that can hit people in the head, or other issues like that that affect not only the person there, but it has to also be a problem that affects the public as well and raises safety issues. Next slide, please. Okay. My colleague, Julia Nidecker Gonzalez, will now do job creation and retention.
Okay, thank you, Gloria. So a question came in, is limited clientele a national objective? I responded to the question, but I just want to reemphasize that there are 3 national objectives to those who are brand new. And the way I sometimes remember it is, LSU, whatever, Louisiana State University, whatever you can use as an acronym to remember LSU, those are the 3 national objectives. You're serving low and mod people in the first national objective. You're serving anyone that's low and moderate income. The second national objective, you're clearing slum and blight. And the third national objective, you're meeting an urgent need. We have just reviewed area benefit activities, limited clientele activities, which is a subcategory of the first national objective. The third subcategory is housing, if you see it. And now we're going to move on to jobs. This is very fast for someone who's new, and this is why we recommend that you go to Explore CDBG, and you'll see a whole series of videos, and the CDBG 101 will walk you through this. So thank you for your patience. Okay, next slide. All right, so we are now in the 4th category of the first national objective, and this is called low mod jobs, creating and retaining jobs for low and moderate income people. And so these funds are, CDBG funds can be used for both job creation and retention. And typical activities include providing loans to businesses, giving money to stores or commercial entities to rehab their business, to pay for infrastructure for a business. There are all kinds of ways that money can be given to ensure that jobs are created and retained. And in order to meet this criteria, CDBG funded activities must create or retain permanent jobs, and 51% of the jobs must be available to or held by low and moderate income persons. Okay, and I'm going to walk you through what we mean by that. Next slide. Okay, for created jobs, to show that a business is providing jobs that are held by a low and moderate income person, the business must have documentation of the income status of the person at the time of hire. Also, jobs are considered available to low and moderate income people if the business agrees to hire unqualified persons and provide them with the necessary training. For jobs to be considered retained, CDBG funds would be used to keep the person employed, and the job needs to be held by a low and moderate income person. So sometimes CDBG can be used to help keep someone in a job. For example, if they've been doing well, but they need a new skill, the grantee might use CDBG funds to upgrade their training, and that would increase their skill set so that they could be retained. Okay, next slide. So let's break this down. For jobs to be considered held by low and moderate income persons, 51% of the actual full-time equivalent jobs, which is 40 hours a week, that are filled must be held by low and moderate income persons. So as I said, businesses have to have documentation on file that shows the income status of the person at the time they're hired, and this can be done by a self-certification form. Also, though, we have examples of qualifying documents for presumed benefit, which means you pretty much know they're low income. So a person can, for example, show that they're in Section 8 housing, and we don't have to requalify them because we know for them to be in public housing or Section 8 housing, they're low income automatically by virtue of that program. Or they can show that they're receiving food stamps, or children in the family may be receiving free or reduced lunch at school. That's proof that they're low income. So the agreement that the CDBG grantee or the subrecipient has with the business must state its commitment that a minimum of 51% of the full-time equivalent jobs will be held by low and moderate income persons, along with a listing of job titles. And this is really important because a lot of businesses will say, oh, we're going to hire them. And oh, yeah, we're going to hire them. We're going to make sure 51% are low and mod income, coming from distressed, areas of our city or town, excuse me. But you really want to get the business to put that in writing. You want them, there should be an agreement between the CDBG grantee or the subrecipient and the business outlining all the jobs, which are full-time, which are part-time, and that agreement should be written up front. Okay, next slide. For jobs to be considered available to low and moderate income persons, no special skills, training, or education should be required. Low and moderate income persons must receive first consideration. And again, there must be a written agreement with the business between the CDBG grantee or the subrecipient and the business. So the written agreement with the business must state that it will provide the necessary training for any jobs that require special skills or education. So for example, if CDBG is paying for a job training program and Amazon or a local business is going to hire them, they need to state, they can say, look, we'll take high school kids. They don't have to be trained. We will train them on exactly what they need to do. And they don't have to have special skills right, before they're hired. So the business must also provide, just like we said in the previous slide, a listing of job title of the permanent jobs to be created. And they need to identify which jobs will be made available to the low and moderate income people. And third, they need to have a description of the actions that the business will take to ensure that the low and moderate income people are given first consideration. So in a way, what we're really asking for is them to outline their hiring practices for the population we're trying to get hired. So the business can do this by identifying the low and moderate income persons that were interviewed and for the jobs, and the low and moderate income persons that were actually hired. So they might say, okay, we made this job available to X number of people. We interviewed Y number of people, but the number that we hired is Z. And so it's all transparent and it's in writing. Next slide. Okay, so individuals may be presumed low and moderate income for jobs in several scenarios. For example, businesses must have records of them that with the employees' addresses that indicate that they reside in census tracts that are 20% or 30% low and moderate income, along with a description of pervasive poverty and general distress. So when we say presumption, job presumptions, what we're really saying is, if they don't have proof of income, but we know they're from, living in a neighborhood that's very low income and the census tract can prove it, that might be another way to presume they're low and moderate income and would qualify for the 51% low mod job. Secondly, businesses must have records with a data source that they use for determining that the percentage was met. So if I walk in for a job with 5 other people and I am low income and I give the employer my address with the zip code, that business can go online and look up the zip code through a mapping program and see that I'm from a low income area. So that's, with today's technology, it's far easier than in the past. The businesses must also have a description of the pervasive poverty and general distress in the census tracts. So they can't just say, okay, you know, it says it's low mod, but there are services that show that an area is low income. They might say, for example, crime data and unemployment data will match those and may show that the potential applicant who's applying for a job, who's been trained by CDBG or through a CDBG training program, does indeed come from a low census tract. Okay, next slide. All right, if you're going to use your CDBG-CV funds, your CARES Act funds, keep in mind that the regulation at 24 CFR 57208A4(5) was waived to allow a census tract poverty rate of 20% rather than 30%, and which shows pervasive poverty and general distress as identified at 57208A4(5)C. So what's happening here is, due to COVID, we all know that jobs were shut down on March 12th, 2020. The whole world shut down. We know that it put tremendous stress on businesses. And this is one of the waivers that allows CDBG-CV grantee recipients to use the 20% poverty rate versus the 30. This is one of the waivers to allow more flexibility, because we're trying to ensure that as many people stay employed during this very challenging time we're going through. Secondly, the regulation at 24 CFR 57208A4(5)B was waived, and this provision required that central business districts not be included unless the census tract had a poverty rate of 30%. Again, allowing more flexibility to qualify individuals and businesses to increase job placement and keep jobs. Next slide. Okay, so for record keeping, CDBG record keeping requirements at 570.506B7 was also waived to allow grantees to substitute records showing the type of job and the annual wages or salary of the job, instead of maintaining records showing the person's family size and income to demonstrate that the person who filled or held the job was low and moderate income. Again, more flexibility so that we can get CARES Act money out faster, and so that more people can stay employed or gain employment. And finally, HUD will consider a person income qualified in their annual, if their annual wages or salary of the job is equal to or less than the Section 8 low incomes limit established by HUD. So grantees will typically obtain such information from assisted businesses rather than each person who receives the job. All right, so that's a quick snapshot of the fourth subcategory of the first national objective. We talked about low and moderate area benefit, where we fund maybe a public facility and the people in the area can use that. Boys and Girls Club, for example, that's an area benefit. We talked about limited clientele, where we serve a specific clientele, and I highly recommend you go to the reg there to get the 7 ways that LMC limited clientele can be used. Then we talked about housing briefly, and I just finished talking about the fourth subcategory of the first national objective, and that is low and moderate income jobs. And most of the ways that we support job creation and retention with the CDBG program is through economic development at 57203. We have fabulous videos on all of these subcategories of this national objective, and I highly recommend you Google Explore CDBG to get background information for those who are new. Now I'm going to pass this back to Gloria. Oh, next slide.
Sorry, my hands are wet. Okay. You did, okay. Next slide, please.
No, Gloria, actually, that's where you start.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem.
I went to get some water, and when I came back, you said I was on. I said, uh-oh.
Okay, no
Sorry, I
problem.
went to get some water because my mouth keeps drying and I keep, okay. There's several ways to document income. We have the definition in our regs at 24 CFR 570.3. However, note that that is a little outdated with regard to the references, because it still references some of the old Section 8 citations that are no longer where they say they are. We can use the Section 8 definition of annual income, which we just call the Part 5 definition, or the IRS tax forms. Even though the regs still talk about census long forms, they don't exist anymore. Therefore, that reference should be removed from the regulations. So really, there are only two options. But whichever definition you use, you have to be consistent with regard to how you use it within programs or activities. So let's say you're qualifying folk for home housing, families for households for housing rehab. And you can't qualify house A, the resident, they're using the Section 8 annual income, and then house B comes and you want them to present tax forms. It has to be consistent throughout the same type of programs or activities. It's either one or the other, but you can't have both in the same activity. And that's for the purposes of consistency. But when you're determining the annual income of everyone in a household for housing or for other, other activities where it may be an individual family income, you have to use the income for everyone in the house for the upcoming 12-month period. It has to be projected. The regulations talking about projecting the income. If someone knows that they're going to be promoted in 6 months, and now they're going to be making another $5,000 a year or something, they have to disclose that information when they are applying for assistance. But I want to point out something. The Part 5 definition we follow for the most part. Now, there's a provision there in Part 5, 609, I think it's C, where it says annual income does not include, and it excludes folk under 18. We don't have that prohibition in CDBG. If they work, their income is counted, even if they're under the age of 18. So while that may be applicable when using the Part 5 definition, you don't exclude income for people under 18. That part of Part 5 is not applicable to CDBG. Next slide, please. Okay. Here it talks about ways you can document income. We had already talked about defining it and how it can be documented. The regs in 24 CFR 570-506 identify these ways that you can document income. I mean, some of them are self-explanatory, like a letter from an employer stating that Susie Q works here and has worked here for 5 years and makes XX a year, Another one that's popular is if a person qualifies for another program that has The same restrictions regarding income as the CDBG program, which is they have to be 80% or less LMI. If they can present evidence that they qualify under another program with those requirements, like they list here, you know, Section 8, WIC, or SNAP, or any of the others, they can use that as documentation for income because they've already been income qualified. It's just that someone else did the work and made the determination that they were income qualified. So the letter that they get saying that they're eligible for Section 108, that can be used. Evidence that the person is homeless. That is a little harder because nobody gives anybody a letter saying that they're homeless. But if they've been at a shelter, they may be able to get documentation from the person running the shelter. But other than that, it's, you know, unless they've been served by some other program that documents their homelessness, that may be harder to get, but it's necessary if you're serving that population. We do allow, and we've mentioned before, self-certifications from the person receiving the assistance. You see the warning here because if you're monitored and it's determined that your certification forms were signed by folk and the information they provided is incorrect or fraudulent, it may make your whole project ineligible and may require repayment. Depending on how many you have for a particular activity. I mean, because the requirement is 51% LMI. So if you're serving a large number of people, maybe one or two, I mean, they can go under the 49%. But we recommend, but we don't require, when I say we, I mean HUD, that if you're going to use self-certifications, that they're not used for high dollar activities like housing rehab that could cost in the many thousands of dollars. I mean, things where they receive, you know, food from food banks and things like that. Those type of public services, we encourage the use of self-certification forms. But we recommend a warning that the person signs saying that they understand that the information they're providing can be verified by HUD at any time, because actually it's true. If you're monitored, the monitor that comes in can request proof that the self-certifications that you have, or usually a random sample of them, are actually accurate, which means that perhaps they checked some of them and found that they were okay. But it's recommended that you use caution if you use self-certifications. We also allow other agencies that serve people, like local employment agencies and other offices that determine income and maintain the documentation on that. You know, there's an Office of Employment Services, I think in DC, where you can go and they help you look for a job. And I mean, you know, that's something, you know, they can say, yes, this person is unemployed. Don't make, you know, they don't make any money. They only receive unemployment or whatever the case may be. And that they, you know, to document that they're LMI. Next slide, please. Okay, we just talked about this. I guess I didn't, I guess I got a little ahead of myself. Yes, we also see another instance where they're not recommended. Emergency grant assistance provided under CV, because even though there's no public service cap, if you're paying arrearages plus, the 6 months that you're allowed, that can run into easily the many thousands of dollars, depending on the cost of living where you are, how much rents are where you are. I mean, in DC, I live outside of the city, but the minimum that you're going to pay for somewhere decent is probably around $2,000. It may be even higher a month. And I'm not talking about a big five, or a 3-bedroom apartment. I'm talking about a little 1-bedroom apartment, a little studio. I mean, there's some areas in DC where it's the rent is extremely high. And, if you lived in you had one of those places that at least costs $2,000 or $3,000 a month, and then you lose your job during the pandemic and you need assistance, can you imagine how many thousands of dollars that's going to be? Because that's also a high dollar activity, we don't recommend it, but we don't prohibit using self-certs for the CDBG-CV Emergency Grant Assistance Program. Next slide, please. Okay. I'm trying to make sure that I'm not going past my thing. Okay. My colleague Julia will now present on urgent need.
Gloria, no, I'm sorry. You're going to do slum and blight, and I'm doing urgent needs.
I don't have, okay. I'm sorry, I must have skipped slides when I was turning the pages. Forgive me, you all. It's been a long week. Okay. All right. Slum and blight. Let's go there. Okay. I mentioned the overall benefit requirement at the beginning. And so a grantee may use up to 30% for slum and blight and or urgent needs. So let's get into slum blight area. Next slide, please. Okay. These are activities that address a deteriorated or deteriorating physical environment. It has nothing to do with the income of people that may live in the area. It's that the area is in a state of deterioration. And usually to alleviate that, some of the activities that may be carried out that meet that national objective is code enforcement. Even though I must say most people use area benefit for that, but slum blight area is also a national objective for this activity. Infrastructure improvements, particularly if they are in a state of deterioration, and commercial rehabilitation. You may have an area that was a high-performing economic development area, or an area where you had a lot of economic development, but for whatever reason, maybe the taxes were raised on businesses and they abandoned the area. They moved to places where the taxes are lower. And so now you have this area with all these abandoned commercial buildings in them. And of course, you want to alleviate that. So to the extent you can use CDBG to arrest that deterioration. But you have to go to 57208B1, and it'll tell you there that the area has to be defined as slum and blighted and meet that definition under state or local law. And usually we say the area has to be designated, and the designation period used to be 10 years. I don't think we've actually changed that, but I would think it'd be safe to say that now the designation probably is closer to the one for the NRSA. That used to be 10 years as well, but now those have to be reviewed every 5 years. So I would say that it's probably better to reevaluate an area after 5 years to determine whether or not it remains slum and or blighted with regard to the appearance and meeting the definition under state and local law. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the reg. This is the actual language of the regulation. You have two choices. When we talked about the public improvements, buildings and infrastructure, other things, have to be in a general state of deterioration. And there must be at least two kinds. I mean, you know, you have your infrastructure and you have your buildings. So those are two types that can be viewed and seen in states of deterioration, and they meet the requirement. Now, the second one talks about a percentage of properties that experience one or more of these conditions. I briefly touched on one before. Not only the physical deterioration that you can see, but abandonment of properties. I mean, that can be housing as well as commercial. Because when the Great Recession hit, or whatever it was called in 2008 and 9, a lot of people unfortunately lost their homes due to foreclosure. And there were large areas in the country that had a high concentration of abandonment of properties and no one to care for them, hence, you know, deterioration, unless, you know, they were able to use NSP funds, but that's another story. Anytime you have high turnover, high chronic vacancy rates, there's an issue there. There's something going on there. And that can cause the building to be in a state of deterioration. Anytime there are property value drops, huge drops in an area because of something, sometimes it only takes one or two abandoned properties, depending on the level of deterioration, to bring down a whole area, you know, maybe that particular block. And it can drop the property values of other buildings in that same block, even though they may not be in a state of deterioration, which may cause the area to be considered for a slum blight area designation. Next slide, please. Okay, slum and blight spot is the second slum and blight national objective. Here you have, usually it's a building, but it has to be a specific condition of blight or environmental contamination in a structure or an area that's not in a slum blight designated area. These are the activities that a grantee is limited to carrying out in such an area, because you can only do what is necessary to eliminate conditions detrimental to public health and safety. So you can acquire an abandoned building for the purpose of either clearing, you know, to remove the blight, or fixing it, you know, up, or, you know, relocation if it's occupied, because if it's occupied, you have to relocate the ones there. Historic preservation. There's a little twist to that one we won't get into here. Remediation of environmentally contaminated properties, and rehabilitation, of course. But when this is carried out and using this national objective, there has to be something else behind it that's going to address the slum and blighted conditions that resulted in this spot blight. And as I said, it has to be something that affects public health and safety, not just the resident of the building or the tenants in the building. It has to affect public health and safety. Next slide, please. This one is the third category, and it's very, it's not really used very much. We have very few grantees that have urban renewal programs that still exist, that are actually in place, because this was something that was done during the 70s. Typical activities are infrastructure improvements and economic development. But the activity has to be one that's identified in an urban renewal plan, and it has to be one that's necessary to complete that plan. As I said, there are very few grantees in the country that still have an existing urban renewal plan. But do note that this is not something that's applicable to the state CDBG program. It's only applicable for entitlements. And now at this time, I will turn it over to my colleague, Julia Nadecker-Gonzalez, to speak about urgent need.
Thank you, Gloria. Okay, so we saw that the serving low and moderate income people has 4 subcategories. Clearing slum and blight has 3 subcategories. And now I'm going to go to the third national objective, urgent need, that has no subcategories. So it's a little easier. And the citation for urgent need is 570.208C for entitlements and 574.83D for states. And let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the urgent need is used to address emergency situations, and that can mean floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, strong storms. They need to be presidentially declared as a disaster, so that's very important to know. And to meet the urgent need test, certain things have to be followed, as you can see on the slide. Existing conditions must pose a serious and immediate threat to the health and welfare of the community. So it has to be something like a seawall has broken and the ocean's coming over and flooding houses. It really has to be something where the conditions are so serious that they're threatening, the welfare of the community. Or it could be a hazardous waste issue where the sewage is overflowing and contaminating the water. The second test to see if it meets the urgent need national objective or purpose for spending your CDBG dollars is that the existing conditions are recent or recently became urgent. And that's generally in the past year and a half, the last 18 months. And the grantee needs to provide proof, the grantee or the subrecipient needs to provide proof that they cannot finance the cleanup on their own. In other words, they don't have funds in their city budget or county budget to do this. So they're going to come to CDBG to help them with this urgent need. The grantee must have documentation showing the nature and degree of seriousness of the condition requiring assistance. Now with our smartphones, they can take photographs, they can show, trees have toppled and wires are loose and across the street. And so it's very important that they document the nature and degree of the seriousness and that they don't have money in their budget to pay for it. Now, if a community receives assistance from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Association, those funds have to be exhausted first before CDBG funds are used. And for anyone who's familiar with our CDBG disaster relief program, there are some fantastic videos again on our HUD Exchange that talk about how really CDBG is the last source of funding to come in during an emergency. We are more long-term rebuilding, whereas FEMA is short-term. So keep that in mind, that all FEMA money must be spent before any CDBG dollars go in for meeting an urgent need. Next slide. Okay, so to meet the urgent need test for CDBG-CV funds for COVID, a grantee may use the same records that they used to show that grant funds were used to prepare, to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus as required by the CARES Act to alleviate existing conditions. So, you know, if there's, you know, if they are using CARES Act money for some urgent need, they would use the same records that tie back to that activity. Also, grantees can refer to the President's declaration of the ongoing coronavirus disease pandemic. And if you Google the HHS, the Health and Human Services press release declaring a public health emergency for the entire US, or state and local emergency declarations to document that existing conditions were recent or became urgent, then that should suffice. We all know this virus is ebbing and flowing. I mean, the variants come out, we're in a state of emergency with the Delta variant, and then we go back in, and then we, you know, we're confined, and then we can go back out again. And then it's the Omicron. And again, there may be urgent needs when there's a surge because hospitals are overbooked and they might need CDBG dollars to put the homeless in hotels temporarily until the, you know, until the patients, the homeless patients can go to the doctor. I mean, we've heard of a lot of hospitals that are so overflowing that they have to send their low-income homeless people to hotels temporarily until there's room to take care of them. And sometimes CDBG dollars come in to provide temporary shelter or services to the homeless. So my point being is that with the ebb and flow of this virus over the last 2 years, there are times that a city or county or a state can declare an emergency because the variant is so strong. Okay, next slide. So again, a grantee that's using CARES Act money, their CDBG-CV grant funds for an activity may use the documentation that the activity will prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus to demonstrate that it or a unit of general local government within a state is able to finance the activity on its own. And the grantee can also use mandatory duplication of benefits requirements to demonstrate that no other funds are available for an activity. So in other words, they can show this, we don't have funding for this urgent need, and we're not duplicating any dollars from other agencies for this particular need, and then it could be funded. Because if you have proof that you have other funding for the urgent need, then you're supposed to refrain from using CDBG. The whole idea is not to be double dipping into 2 pots of federal funds for the same situation and replicating the payments for whatever you're addressing that's urgent. So urgent need covers natural disasters. Sometimes hazardous disasters like sewage spillage. It can cover coronavirus urgent needs when the variants flare up and resources are tight. So it can address several types of needs that are urgent, but most often prior to COVID, it has to be a presidentially declared disaster. All right, so that wraps up our overview of the three national objectives. And I just want to tell the new people that we have a fabulous document I'm going to post on the chat to help clarify how you know if something's eligible and where to find the national objective. And it's called our IDIS matrix code definitions. It's a document that I find to be like a cheat sheet, in that if you literally open this document and you do control find, and you can find so many activities on this sheet, and it'll list not only the eligible activity citation in our regulations, but it'll list how you're going to codify the expense of CDBG dollars in our system, which is called IDIS. And there'll be a training on that tomorrow. But I just want to say that don't get nervous about how to know if something's eligible or not, or which national objective it is, because between our IDIS matrix code charts and our definitions, it's all outlined for you. So, and eventually I'm hoping by our 50th anniversary, this will be on a phone app. But I will post this now, the IDIS definition sheet, where you can find a listing of all the activities that are eligible for CDBG and their citations. And then I just want to share that. Hold on, it's right here. It's on the HUD Exchange, and it doesn't list the national objectives, but it lists all the activities that are eligible to be spent with CDBG funds. And tomorrow you will get a matrix code Excel chart that'll tie each of these activities I just posted to the national objective. And it's almost like a, I don't know if you want to say a concordance in a Bible, where you can cross-check the activity with the national objective on the Excel file that you'll see in tomorrow's training. And I might even be able to post that Excel file along with this definition of all the activities and how they can be funded. So I'm now going to go to the next slide, because we finished the national objectives, and I'm going to talk to you about overall benefit, which Gloria touched on, but I just want to remind you, if you look at your chart of the national objectives, we have the 4 subcategories of low and moderate income activities that can be funded: area benefit, limited clientele, housing, and jobs. 70% of your funds must be spent on the first national objective, and 30% on slum and blight or urgent need. So this is to say that that the overall benefit means that 70% must meet that first national objective. This is a statute that requires that 70% of all CDBG expenditures benefit low and moderate persons. And it's cumulative. It's cumulative actual expenses, not just what's budgeted. And it's got a certification period of 1 to 3 years. So a grantee may only change its overall benefit certification period when the current one expires. So some grantees have 3-year overall benefit certifications showing that over 3 years, they spent 70% or more of their grant funds on that first national objective, either helping area benefit low mod people, helping with limited clientele activities, limited low mod housing, or low mod jobs, 70%. If a grantee has a 3-year certification period, it cannot change it to a 2-year certification period and vice versa. So grantees may request a waiver of 24 CFR 91.225B4 little I, you can look this all up, to change its overall benefit period. But generally, most grantees have a 3-year period because it just makes it easier to manage their expenses. So this is a way of Congress ensuring that the bulk of community development block grant funds are going to communities that are under-resourced, to people who don't have, you know, sewage pipes in their neighborhoods, don't have community centers, don't have senior centers. They just don't have the resources they need. So this grant is there to ensure that that 70% of the funds goes to this particular community. Okay, next slide. So when calculating the low mod overall benefit, first, it's based on actual expenditures, as we said, and it includes activities that are met with the area benefit, limited clientele activities, job activities, and housing. But for housing, only the amount of funds that are spent on low and moderate income households that are occupied is covered. So if you spend money on housing and the units never get occupied, that will not count towards your 70%. Also, planning and administrative costs, for example, the planning and administrative costs of running your CDBG program in your city, county, or state is not included in the 70% overall expenditure requirement. So, so very important to keep that in mind. And what's great is that our reporting system will help with the calculation to ensure that grantees are meeting that requirement. Okay, next slide. All right, so the overall benefit requirement for CARES Act grants, CDBG-CV grants, is applicable to each individual CDBG-CV grant instead of the 1, 2, or 3 year certification period. So for the regular CDBG program, your financial analyst or the person who does the accounting in your office will measure if 70% was spent of regular CDBG funds over a 1, 2, or 3 year period. With CARES Act money, it's strictly for each individual grant. It's not combined. It's not over. It's not combined with other grants. It stands alone. And so it's, in other words, the overall benefit is calculated separately for CDBG grants and CARES Act grants. And finally, program income, very important here. The program income generated by activities assisted with CDBG-CV activities will be treated as regular CDBG program income. So if you're funding a CARES Act activity and it generates program income, that goes back to your regular CDBG program. Why is this important? Timeliness. For those of you who are new, timeliness is something that, where at least you have to spend a certain amount of money in your grant every year, and it's measured at a certain point each year. And if you exceed 1.5 in your line of credit of your grant, 1.5 times your grant, then you're going to be untimely. So if program income is coming into your regular CDBG program from the CARES Act activities, the CDBG-CV activities, keep in mind that you have to keep an eye on it because you do not want to be untimely with your expenditures. And again, for those of you who are brand new watching this, if you don't know anything about CDBG timeliness, we have a fabulous video on that under Explore CDBG videos. Just Google Explore CDBG and it'll clarify that. So very important to keep track of program income. That often happens with many of our programs like the NSP program, Neighborhood Stabilization Program. That program's program income also poured right into the regular program. So keep an eye on your CARES Act funds that generate program income so you don't become untimely. Okay, next slide. Yeah, next slide. Thank you. All right, this is to wrap up. So how do you know how to choose the right national objective? You're pretty new at CDBG. You're like, okay, are we serving a low mod person? Are we doing slum and blight clearance, or is this an urgent need? Well, usually, you know, when it's by a process of elimination, you know, it's not going to be slum and blight or urgent need. if it's not either one of those. But among the 4 subcategories of the low mod national objective, low mod income national objective, choose the easiest one to document. Generally, low and moderate income benefit, area benefit is the easiest. So if I have a Boys and Girls Club and we're funding an after school activity, and I know that the area is over 51% low mod where the Boys and Girls Club is, I can use LMA, low and moderate area benefit. But if I have a Boys and Girls Club and it's in a mixed neighborhood and it's not, the census tract says it's not over 51% low mod, then I might have to use limited clientele, LMC, and especially if it's strictly for youth. I mean, it could be for youth and adults. I mean, sometimes there are computer training programs for adults in one room and a basketball program or whatever, a jobs program for teens in another area. But the point being is choose the national objective that is the easiest to document. And generally, low and moderate income jobs are considered most difficult to track because of administrative requirements. You want to make sure you have those business agreements with the businesses outlining the jobs that are going to be filled. That's a little more tedious, but it's what Congress likes the most, I'll be honest. Job creation is very popular among Congress. And finally, always remember when choosing the right national objective that you want to choose the first national objective over the second and third if there's a choice, because 70% of your funds need to be spent on the low and moderate income clientele, whereas slum and blight removal and urgent need doesn't necessarily have to specifically address low income people. So always remember that overall requirement that 70% of your funds are spent to serve low and moderate income individuals. Okay, next slide. And I will turn this now back over to Gloria for just, I think, 2 more slides. And yeah, so go ahead, Gloria.
All righty, we have questions in the queue. And I've been marking them live because we've been addressing questions that way, FYI. So once I do these 2 slides, then we'll take turns answering these questions. Okay, last but not least, we're going to talk about NRSAs briefly. There are several reasons why some grantees want to develop an NRSA. They have areas that need a lot of help. There's no economic development, no stores. I mean, there's just nothing really there, no amenities for the citizens. And the neighborhood, honestly, has a lot of needs, or the area has a lot of needs. And this is a way that they can use CDBG to take an approach, multifaceted approach, actually, to address the various needs in these areas. And what they're usually focused on the most are economic development and neighborhood revitalization to assist the area. I briefly mentioned some of the flexibilities that can be used in a NRSA. Grantees that want an NRSA have to submit it, their proposal to the HUD field office for consideration. CPD notice 1616 describes how to develop an NRSA and have your citizen participation, include propose, if there are any businesses and nonprofit organizations and such, you also want to consolidate with them as well to find out what is needed in the area, so that the approach that you take will not just meet one need, but possibly all, as many needs as can be. Okay, just briefly retouching on it. In an NRSA, when you're doing housing rehabilitation, I'm not talking about home ownership assistance, but rehabilitation, the units, the regulations use the words may be considered a single structure for national objective compliance purposes. But what that means is that you add up all the homes rehabilitated in a program year in that NRSA, and 51% of those have to be occupied by low and moderate income households. The next one is with regard to economic development. So any economic development activities that are carried out in a HUD approved NRSA can meet the area benefit national objective rather than the low and moderate income jobs national objective. Next slide, please. Okay. As stated here, the NRSA plan has to be submitted to HUD for approval, but this is how it's submitted. They can either do it when they're doing a new consolidated plan or as an amendment to a consolidated plan that already exists. They also are required to make sure that they have followed the requirements in 1616 so that they can be approved. Not every request received for NRSA designation is approved, I'll say that. But HUD, if it's going to approve it, it must be done in writing. In other words, you'll get a letter stating that, let's say, for example, your Main Street NRSA has been approved, for 5 years. And, in 5 years, you'll have to reevaluate and determine whether or not the area can continue to be considered an NRSA. So with regard to submission of it, if, like I said, either at the beginning or even as an amendment to an existing one. Some people like to do it because they do their comp plans every 5 years. So if they submit them at the same time, then they know they have to review both at the same time rather than having a different date for the NRSA versus the consolidated plan. Makes it easier to remember. When approvals given and activities are carried out and the grantee reports on these in their CAPER, we will, HUD will review it to determine if these activities are meeting any of the goals and objectives and outcomes that were identified in the application for an NRSA to ensure that they're being met. If it's determined that no progress is being made at all, and you've reached this 5-year mark, HUD can say, well, we're not going to approve another 5-year designation for you. Also, if there's fraud or anything else, it can be revoked. But in most cases, when it's approved and resubmitted for approval, there's nothing that prohibits approval of the NRSA for another 5-year period. If it's been determined that progress is being made, but more work needs to be done. Now with that, we're going to go to our 4th poll question.
Gloria, as you can see,
Yes.
no responses coming online.
Okay. Well, in the interest of time, it looks like the answers coming in are correct. Because the answer is no. And the reason is because all activities must meet a national objective. It's a statutory requirement. So that is correct. So
I'll just chime in here real quick. For those of you who have had this training, ignore this, but for the newer people, think of this as two sides of a coin. Before that money can go out the door, the first side of the coin is the national objective, and the other side of the coin is the eligible activity. The two must be met. And so this is very important. First, you want to make sure it meets one of the three national objectives. And for the low mod national objective, it only needs to meet one of the four subcategories to meet a national objective. Or for slum and blight, one of the three subcategories means it meets a national objective, and it has to meet an eligible activity. And I posted the IDIS matrix code definitions that list all the eligible activities that can be met. So that'll help you. But yes, you answered that correctly. The two have to be, you have to meet a national objective and you have to meet an eligible activity before any funds go out the door.
okay. All right. Question time. And we have 20 minutes. So I'm going to try to get through this and answer these so we don't hold people over.
And I'll try to help you.
Okay, yeah, we'll take turns.
Yeah.
Someone had wrote, and I tried to answer it by typing the answer, but I have to admit that it's not complete. It says this be classified as area benefit subcategory if it's located in the CDBG eligible area block group. Perhaps, wait a minute, maybe I need to go up some more. Okay, yeah, it's me. Okay. All right, my apologies. It asks to review upper quartile a little more clearly. I'm not going to kid you. It has a math related way to calculate, and math is the worst subject on earth for me. But I'll tell you where it is in the regs. It's 24 CFR 57208 A2 little I. And it tells you how to calculate the upper quartile, but you really don't have to do it. The Systems Development Evaluation Division does it, and they identify annually what the list of exception grantees are. Okay. I don't know if you can see them, Julia, but I'll read it. And even though I tried to answer it by typing a short answer, I'm going to let you address this one. It says, in regard to operating a food pantry in a school with CDBG funds, if the pantry is only open to the school children and their parents, could this be classified as area benefit subcategory if it is located in a CDBG eligible area block group?
Okay, I would say if the food bank is strictly serving the parents and the children, that's one issue. But if it's a food bank outdoors at the school, which is most likely the situation with COVID, it's probably an outdoor food bank where parents and children drive by and pick up the food. As long as 51% in that residential neighborhood around the food bank is low mod, then you should be fine. So as long as the low mod area where you're providing the public service, which is food assistance, is 51% low mod, you should be fine. But it's got to be predominantly residential. We don't want a food bank in the middle of a city where people are coming out of a metro from all different parts of the city to get food.
Okay.
Feel free to chime in.
Yes, I'm sorry. I do want to point out a nuance in it. It says only open to the school children and their parents. If you're going to limit something and it's not available to all the residents in a defined service area for the purposes of meeting the low and moderate income area benefit national objective, then it can't be area benefit. It would have to be limited clientele because the regulations specifically state available to all the residents. So it can't be just for a certain group.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was an indoor food bank or
Yeah, they don't say.
they don't say. Yeah, okay.
They don't say, yeah, because I'm looking at the Q&A. You click on that, and that's where I get this from.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and still answer the next one. It says, what is the difference between limited clientele and presumed clientele?
Oh, I already posted that.
Huh?
I posted that answer. Oh, yeah.
Okay, because I don't know where you post. It's not in
Oh.
the question and answer thing.
Yeah. Okay,
I'll mention it briefly since it's here.
okay, sure, go ahead.
Okay. Limited clientele has 4 categories. Presumed clientele is only one of the 4. When you're talking about limited clientele, you have the presumed groups, which is your homeless, elderly, migrant farm workers, abused children. There's several others. And the other 2 provisions, the second one is to require information on family size and income so that 51% of the beneficiaries are shown to be low and moderate income. The third provision of that one is limiting the activity exclusively to low and moderate income persons, meaning you have to have documentation showing that the activity is limited to LMI. The fourth one there is nature and location, where whatever activity you're carrying out, you have to be able to show that the nature of the activity and where it's being carried out will clearly demonstrate that the beneficiaries of that activity are low and moderate income persons. With the pandemic, they've been using this one more for some of the food bank activities because they will do it in an area that is 51% or greater LMI, but they will use nature and location because that way you don't need to collect any income information from the beneficiaries. It's just that the provision of food during a pandemic plus the location of it, it's in an area that's documented as 51% or greater LMI, it meets that nature and location. You also have micro enterprise owners that may be LMI. That's a separate category of, outside of the 4. And then you also have the
Removal of architectural barriers.
And some of the job activities.
For the audience, Gloria, real quick, Gloria, I'm going to make sure that we can post a chart with all the limited clientele citations and purposes, because it really is confusing. Unless you go to 57208A2 online and see the 4 first categories and the 3 subcategories, a total of 7, it can be confusing. So somehow I'm going to make sure we get you all the activities benefiting low and moderate income persons for LMC so that you can see it clearly outlined. It's a lot for this one particular subcategory. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Julia.
I'll go on to the next one. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Can limited clientele be a national objective, or must they still meet one of the 3 national objectives? That's exactly as it reads.
Yes. So I did post the answer for this. Limited clientele is one of the 4 subcategories, and they're alphabetical. A for area, C for limited clientele, H for housing, J for jobs. They're alphabetical. So limited clientele is one of the four subcategories of the low and moderate income first national objective. And it can serve in 7 different ways, four ways that Gloria just mentioned and 3 minor ways. But you really have to go to 57208A2 to see it outlined online, and you have to make a chart to see all the different ways. Yeah, just to answer that, I posted it, but it's not the overall. I mean, it's one of the 4 subcategories of the first national objective, and it counts as a national objective. Okay.
Okay.
Serves a lot.
I just got a 10-minute notice that
Yes. Okay.
and so we're going to try to be quick.
Yep.
Okay. The person that said they created a presentation and it validates it. Thank you. We also have a CDBG eligible block group map that identifies CDBG low-income areas. Is it safe to assume that if the CDBG public service activity is located in this area, it is the subcategory of LMI area benefit, and the subrecipient will not need to collect income qualifying data? Okay. The first thing you have to do for area benefit is to identify the service area. Once you do that, then you take your maps and you look at the data as a whole to determine if that area meets the 51% requirement, unless you're an exception grantee. If it does, then yes, you have to document that the area, that the activity being carried out is in this area, and you don't need to collect income information from beneficiaries for area benefit. Okay, Julia, how would we define the service area for a mobile COVID testing clinic? The unit will set up in LMI areas around town. Should we combine all of the areas into one large service area or break it down into smaller service areas? Combined, it is still over 51% and primarily residential.
Okay, so I'm not a data expert on this, but
okay, I'll answer quickly only because we don't have time.
Sure, go ahead.
When you have something like that, that's going to be in different places, those are different service areas. So it's not recommended that you combine it into one, because the people one side of town are not going to go to the one on the other side of town. They're going to go to the one where they're located. So it's better to have smaller service areas for each one. And you look at national objective compliance on an individual basis for each mobile clinic. So DC has 8 wards. If you're going to set up one in each ward is a service area, and you would have to determine that each ward is LMI or 51% or greater LMI.
Right,
Or
and you can use mapping services that'll show you that neighborhood where your pop-up COVID center is, or it should show you. And I know I live on 9 blocks from the Capitol, and I know there's a COVID place close by, and you can map out the 10 blocks around our area, and they've shown, you know, it's just serving the 10-block radius because people don't want to go across town. So
yeah, of course. So that's I use that as an example as to, you know, it's like sidewalks. You can't just say because the area is 51% or greater that it's going to serve the whole area or the whole jurisdiction. It won't.
yeah.
Okay. Is housing counseling available under this objective? That's the only part of the question.
Housing counseling is a service. Actually, if you go to your IDIS matrix code, it'll be listed there as an eligible activity, and it'll give you the citation. And it is available under the Housing National Objective, yes.
But that's only if it's an activity delivery cost of homeownership assistance. If it's a standalone public service, it will have to meet different national objectives. If it's a standalone activity. And then you get into whether it'll meet the requirements of Part 5 -100 if it's HUD approved housing counseling. But if it's just simple housing education, for lack of a different term, then yes, but it will have to meet, it can meet limited clientele, it can be limited to, to a group that's 51% LMI or all LMI people.
Right, right.
Okay.
Yep.
For slum blight, if the threat to the public is removed by demolishing a deteriorated and abandoned home, does the grantee have to replace it? No.
I didn't, yeah. Can you read that again? I didn't.
Yeah, only reason I'm going fast is
Yeah, I know we're out of time.
we're out of time. Yeah, no, they don't have to do anything. If you clear it, that's a separate activity under 57201D, and the national objective is slum blight. That is an activity. Once you decide to do something else to it, it's a change of use and subject to the requirements at 57505.
If it's the grantee 57503B7, if it's a subrecipient.
Yes, yes. Okay, in the HUD LMI map, there's a margin of error. Does that margin of error count against the LMI percentage? Like if the LMI percentage of a tract is listed as 70%, but the margin of error is 22%, can we use presumed area benefit? That's beyond me. I can't answer the question.
Yeah, we have a
If you don't know, and if you believe the service at the data census data is incorrect, then that's when you would use a survey. Like I talked about earlier, you can't presume anything. It has to be documented.
That's right. That's right. And you may want to use your data people, or we could occasionally we can contact our policy development people to look it up. But that's something you got to look at, go through your data analysis.
Yeah, you can never presume that an area will meet the area benefit.
It's too dynamic. Stats change all the time.
Exactly. Okay, Julia, you've already provided the site, reg site for slum blight, 24 CFR 57208. B, okay. A full-time student is mentioned on multiple pages of the income calculator guide. For full-time student, only the first 480 of their income is eligible. So for LMI household qualification, will students with part-time jobs include all of their income or just the 480? For quick purposes, I will say that does not apply to CDBG. If you have a student attending college somewhere, they're still considered, because they're still dependent, they're still dependent on their parents in, where they came from. But it doesn't matter how much money they make. It's counted as household income. I mean, I know it says that in Part 5, but all of Part 5 is not applicable to CDBG. Okay. When declaring LMC as the national objective for the activity in your comp plan, is it sufficient to state that the national objective is LMC? Or are you required to specify that participation is limited to LMI only, or that 51% are documented LMI?
Okay, well, LMC means someone's LMI. LMI, low and moderate income national objective, is the umbrella term for the 4 subcategories. So once you say in the comp plan that something is LMC, that means low and moderate income limited clientele. You're already under that umbrella. The subcategory is just, an extension. And I think that's
Yeah, I'll just say quickly.
Yeah.
It's recommended but not required that you identify the subcategory.
Okay.
Homeless.
Gloria
individuals-
works with confidence, yeah. So I think we should wrap up, and any remaining questions, Gloria, can we provide written responses?
I don't know how they do it. They have a way of collecting these.
Yes. Okay. We'll
Okay.
effort because we really are down to 1 minute. I want to thank Gloria and I want to thank all of you for being on today. And like I said, for the new people, don't be overwhelmed. There are so many resources on our HUD Exchange. Google is your best friend. Just Google the topic you're confused about and you'll eventually come to HUD Exchange and find what you're looking for. Because we've got movies, we've got videos, we have transcripts that go with each video that explain things. We have all the IDIS matrix code definitions that give the eligible activity and the matrix code of how the money will be categorized in the reporting system called IDIS. And for the new people, there are also all kinds of notices online that can explain everything we've gone over today in greater depth. This was just a quick snapshot, and we will try to get the answers to you for the remainder of the questions. Thank you, and I think, Gloria, thank you. Anything else, Gloria?
No, we're out of town.
Yeah, I know.